The emotional armor of Capricorn explained. You've met this person before. They show up early. They deliver every time. They remember exactly what you said 3 months ago and hold you to it without ever making a scene about it. But the moment you try to get close, something shifts. The conversation stays on the surface. The warmth you thought you detected disappears. There's a wall, and no matter how long you walk along it, you can't find the door. People call them cold, distant, emotionally unavailable, sometimes worse. But here's what most people never stop to ask. What is the wall actually for? Because armor doesn't come from nowhere. It's built deliberately, layer by layer, in response to something real. And if you want to understand a Capricorn, you don't start with the surface. You start with the architecture underneath it. Today, that's exactly what we're doing. We're going to take the emotional armor of Capricorn apart, systematically, without romanticizing it and without dismissing it, and examine what it's made of, what it protects, what it costs, and what it actually takes to reach the person living behind it. This isn't astrology as entertainment. This is astrology as psychology. And if you stay until the end, the last section contains the one insight that most people in a Capricorn's life never arrive at, and it might change how you see everything that came before. Where it begins, Saturn's signature. To understand the emotional armor of Capricorn, you first need to understand who built it, and more precisely, what was built in response to. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, the planet of structure, limitation, discipline, and time. In traditional astrology, Saturn was considered the most demanding of all planetary influences. It governs reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. It has no interest in comfort. It does not console. It instructs. And its instruction method is, more often than not, adversity, loss, delay, the slow, grinding weight of responsibility arriving before you're ready for it. The Capricorn native, more than any other sign, internalizes this energy. From early age, sometimes a startlingly early age, many Capricorns develop what astrologers call the old soul pattern. They seem serious where other children seem carefree. They worry about things their peers don't think about. They plan for contingencies. They hold back. They observe carefully before they engage. This is not pathology. It is adaptation. When early experience signals, through family dynamics, through a parent who was emotionally unavailable, through a childhood that demanded premature maturity, through a loss that arrived too soon, that vulnerability carries a cost. The Capricorn psyche responds with its most characteristic behavior. It builds. It builds structure. It builds systems. It builds walls. The logic of the wall. Here is the critical misunderstanding most people carry about Capricorn. The emotional armor is not about not feeling. It's about not showing. That distinction matters enormously. Cold people feel very little. Armored people feel deeply. They simply concluded at some point that displaying that depth comes at a cost they are not prepared to pay. Consider the symbol. The sea goat doesn't have the luxury of soft terrain. It climbs. The mountain doesn't accommodate feelings. The mountain responds only to skill, persistence, and careful footing. Slip and you fall. Many Capricorns operate with an internalized version of this logic. Emotions are weather. Weather is unpredictable. Unpredictability introduces risk. Risk must be assessed and managed. So they manage it by compartmentalizing, by deferring emotional processing until the work is done, the deadline is met, the others have been taken care of, and they're finally alone with the full weight of what they have been carrying all day. This is not emotional immaturity. In many cases, it is the opposite, a sophisticated, if ultimately limiting, coping mechanism that allowed someone to function at a high level precisely when falling apart was not an option. The armor was built for a specific environment. The question that matters is whether that environment still exists, and whether the person inside the armor knows the difference. Layer 1. Competence as currency. If you want to understand a Capricorn, pay close attention not to what they say, but to what they do with their time. Achievement, for many Capricorns, is not simply ambition. It is a form of armor. When you are the most prepared person in the room, when your track record speaks more loudly than any emotional declaration could, when your results are undeniable, you become, In a functional sense, difficult to dismiss, difficult to discard. You have made yourself necessary. This is one of the most sophisticated functions of the Capricorn defense mechanism, the construction of external value as a substitute for the exposure of internal need. If I cannot be dismissed, I cannot be abandoned. If I am indispensable, I am safe. Not all Capricorns would recognize this consciously. Most would say they work hard because that is who they are, because standards matter, because mediocrity is genuinely unacceptable to them. All of that may be entirely true, but underneath it, in many cases, is a quieter and more vulnerable calculation that without their usefulness, their productivity, their competence, they might not be wanted simply for existing. That they, stripped of everything they can do, might not be enough on their own. The armor here is built from achievement, and it is effective right up until the moment it isn't. Because you cannot be genuinely held by your resume. The people who only see your output have never actually seen you. And at a certain depth of loneliness, no amount of external success compensates for never having been truly known. Layer 2, the controlled reveal. Capricorn doesn't not communicate. They curate. This is a subtle but critical distinction. When a Capricorn trusts you enough to share something genuinely personal, pay attention to how it comes out. Measured, precise, often almost clinical in its delivery. They will tell you something difficult they went through, in a way that signals, clearly and deliberately, that they have already processed it, that they are not asking for your pity, that they are not falling apart, that they're simply informing you of a relevant fact about their interior life, from a position of stability. This is the controlled reveal, a form of intimacy that preserves dignity. They let you in, but on their terms, at their pace, with an exit always visible. The share has been edited before delivery. It can feel deeply frustrating to people who communicate emotionally and spontaneously, people who equate the rawness of an emotion with the authenticity of its expression. The Capricorn's controlled delivery reads as withholding, as distrust, as a refusal of real vulnerability. But from the inside, this is them being vulnerable. This, the measured, careful share, is Capricorn taking what is for them a significant and deliberate risk. The gap between what Capricorn experiences as vulnerability and what the people around them perceive as openness is one of the most consistent sources of friction in their close relationships. They believe they're giving a great deal. The other person is still waiting for something they feel they haven't received. Both experiences are real. Neither person is wrong. The disconnect lives in the translation. Layer 3. Self-sufficiency as shield. Ask a Capricorn for help sometime. Then notice how rarely they ask in return. Self-sufficiency is perhaps the most visible layer of the armor, and one of the most costly over a long period of time. The Capricorn commitment to handling things independently, to not burdening others, to never being caught in a position of need they cannot immediately resolve on their own, is profound and consistent. It originates in Saturn's fundamental instruction. The world is broadly indifferent to your needs, and the only truly reliable resource you have is yourself. In practice, this means many Capricorns suffer quietly. They will navigate a serious personal crisis with extraordinary external competence, while internally managing something no one around them knows about. They will support everyone in their circle, reliably, consistently, without fanfare, without ever revealing that they, too, are running low. The accumulated cost of this pattern is real. Sustained self-sufficiency without reciprocal support is exhausting in a way that doesn't resolve on its own. It compounds. It produces a specific form of resentment, not expressed outward, not released in confrontation, but slowly deposited, year after year, into an interior account that eventually affects the quality of every relationship they're in. And there is a painful structural irony at the center of this pattern. By never asking, by never revealing need, Capricorn ensures they never receive the support they have spent years denying themselves. The armor keeps perceived threat out, but it also keeps nourishment out. They are simultaneously protected and starving. And the deprivation is, in a very real sense, self-administered. Before we go further, If this kind of analysis is what you've been looking for, not surface-level horoscopes and not dramatic generalizations, but real psychological depth applied to Capricorn energy, subscribe to Capricorn Secrets right now and hit the notification bell. Every week, we go exactly this deep. This channel exists for people who are done with astrology that doesn't take them seriously. The next section is where this gets personal. Don't miss it. The interior life they almost never show. Here is what all that armor is actually guarding. And it is not emptiness. Capricorns who feel genuinely safe or who have done real interior work reveal a depth that consistently surprises the people who only knew the exterior version of them. They are underneath the composure, often intensely sensitive. They feel things slowly, but they feel them completely. A hurt received years ago is not forgotten. A kindness offered in a genuinely difficult moment is carried for a lifetime, even if it's never mentioned again. They have a private sense of humor, dry, precise, often devastating in the best possible way, deployed rarely, which is exactly what makes it land with such force when it does appear. They have aesthetic sensibilities that are refined and rarely volunteered. They have opinions about music, about space, about light, about the precise weight of a silence, that they almost never share unless directly asked. They carry guilt in proportions that would surprise people who know them only by their external confidence. Not because they fail often, they typically don't, but because their internal standards are calibrated so high that even minor shortcomings register as significant. They hold themselves accountable for things long after everyone else has moved on from the incident entirely. And they are, beneath everything, profoundly loyal. When a Capricorn decides that someone matters to them, and this decision is never made quickly, never made casually, never made without evidence, they will show up in ways that are quiet, consistent, and genuinely reliable over the long arc of time. Not dramatic, not performed, not announced, just there in the ways that actually count again and again, long after most people have stopped showing up. This is what the armor protects. Not coldness, not indifference, not the absence of feeling. Something rare and slow-moving and difficult to name. The interior life of a person who decided, early and often, that the outside world was not safe enough to hold it. The core fear, exposure without resolution. If you want to understand what Capricorn most fears emotionally, the answer is specific. Being seen in a moment of weakness before they have processed it, before they have found language for it, before they have something, anything, to show for having survived it. Capricorns can share vulnerability in retrospect. They can say, I went through something difficult, and here's what I learned from it, and here's where I stand now as a result. That form of disclosure is entirely compatible with their sense of self. It has a shape. It has a conclusion. It demonstrates that they endured and that the enduring produced something worth knowing. What they cannot easily do, and what costs them the most in relationships, is say, I am in the middle of falling apart right now. I don't know how to stop it, and I need you to sit with me in this without a resolution in sight. That kind of raw, unfinished vulnerability, the kind that has no narrative arc yet, that offers no conclusion, that requires being witnessed in a state of genuine incompleteness, is deeply uncomfortable for Capricorn. Because Capricorn, by nature and by long habit, presents finished products. They edit before they send. They process before they share. They do not release things that are still in progress. The armor, at its most fundamental level, is not a refusal to feel. It is a refusal to be seen feeling before the feeling has been contained, understood, and reframed into something that serves a recognizable purpose. Something complete. Something that reflects well on their capacity to handle what life puts in front of them. If you are in close proximity to a Capricorn and you want to genuinely reach them, there are approaches that fail reliably. Not because Capricorn is unreachable, but because these particular approaches activate the armor's primary function rather than making it unnecessary. Emotional pressure doesn't work. If you pursue a Capricorn with urgency, if you communicate that they need to open up right now, that the relationship depends on an immediate emotional disclosure, that their silence is a crisis requiring resolution in this moment, they will withdraw. Not because they don't care about the relationship, Because urgency registers as threat, and threat activates the exact mechanism that was built to handle perceived threats: containment, distance, and control. Comparison doesn't work. Telling a Capricorn that other people are more open, more communicative, more willing to be emotionally available is not experienced as motivation. It is received as an attack on their character. It activates the part of them that knows, with complete internal certainty, that they have nothing to apologize for. And the conversation ends there, in a way that makes future attempts harder. Public vulnerability doesn't work. Expecting a Capricorn to open up in a group setting, during a conflict with witnesses, in a context where the exposure is observed by people they haven't specifically chosen to trust. This is asking them to violate their most fundamental operating principle. They will close completely. The moment will be permanently lost, and the relationship will have moved backward rather than forward. Demanding immediacy doesn't work. Capricorn's internal processing is deliberate and slow by design. They need time, real time, to sit with something, to turn it over, to locate precisely what it is they're feeling before they can begin to find honest words for it. Compress that process, and you receive either silence or words they don't actually mean. Neither of those gets you where you're trying to go. What does work? Consistency, sustained over a long period of time, is the single most powerful force in the presence of Capricorn's emotional armor. Not a grand gesture, not a peak emotional moment, not a perfectly constructed conversation. Consistency, showing up again and again, behaving the same way whether the Capricorn is warm or closed, present or withdrawn, reciprocating or not. Demonstrating, through repeated and patient experience, that you are not in the process of preparing to leave. This matters because a significant part of what the armor is protecting against is the anticipated cost of being abandoned by someone they allowed themselves to need. Not necessarily because it has already happened, though often it has, but because Capricorn calculates risk and the historical data on human reliability is not reassuring. The armor is, in part, a practical hedge against the probability of loss. The person who stays, who remains steady through the Capricorn's testing periods, their withdrawals, their professional absorptions that leave no room for intimacy for weeks at a time, begins, over time, to genuinely recalibrate that risk assessment. This recalibration is slow. It does not announce itself, but it is real, and once it happens, what opens is substantial. Intellectual engagement works. Capricorns are at home in the domain of ideas in ways they are not always at home in the domain of feelings. Starting with the analytical, with systems, with patterns, with observations about how things work, creates a low-threat environment in which emotional content can gradually and naturally begin to surface. Many of the most significant Capricorn intimacies begin as conversations that started in the mind and slowly, over time, reach the chest. Allowing them to help you works. Capricorn understands service as one of the primary languages of love. When you allow them to assist, to solve a problem you're facing, to protect you from something, to provide something concrete and useful, you are, in their language, allowing them to love you. And within that dynamic, which gives them both purpose and a familiar form of safety, something warmer very often becomes possible. And finally, counterintuitively, letting them observe you being vulnerable without asking them to match it works. Not creating an emotional debt, not requiring reciprocation, simply being honest in their presence about something difficult and asking nothing in return. Over time, watching vulnerability be expressed and received without catastrophe teaches the Capricorn nervous system something that no amount of verbal reassurance ever could: that it is survivable, that the world keeps moving. That being seen does not mean being destroyed. The risk of wearing it too long. There's a specific and serious risk that comes with armor worn long enough. You forget it's armor. You begin to believe it is simply you. Many Capricorns, by the middle of their lives, have spent so long inside their emotional defenses that dismantling them feels not just uncomfortable, but genuinely disorienting. Not because they don't want closeness, but because the armor has become integrated with their identity in a way that makes the two feel inseparable. To be vulnerable is to become someone they don't recognize. To openly need someone is to become, in their own internal logic, weak in a way that their entire life has been organized around not being. This is the central psychological challenge of the Capricorn archetype at its most contracted. The defense that once served survival becomes, over time, the primary obstacle to the thing's survival was supposed to make possible a full life in genuine contact with other people in the present tense. Saturn, as a planetary archetype, is specifically associated with time and with the structures we construct in our formative years. There's a reason astrologers speak of Saturn returns at approximately 29, 58, and 87 years as moments of structural reckoning. The scaffolding erected in youth eventually requires examination. Some of it is genuinely load-bearing and should be preserved. Some of it was built for conditions that no longer exist and is now simply in the way of everything the person actually wants. The Capricorn who does this work, who begins to distinguish methodically and without sentimentality between a healthy boundary and a habitual defensive pattern, often undergoes a transformation that people around them describe as remarkable. They do not become soft. They do not abandon their standards or their discipline. They become warmer while remaining capable. They become able to receive without immediately reframing it as weakness or obligation. They discover, sometimes for the first time in their adult life, that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. In many contexts, is its most advanced expression. The integrated Capricorn. The healthiest expression of Capricorn energy is not the absence of the armor. It is the freedom to choose, consciously and situationally, when the armor is actually needed. A Capricorn who has done genuine interior work retains everything that makes them who they are. The discipline, the reliability, the long-term thinking, the quiet authority that comes from being someone who consistently does what they say they will do over years and decades. These qualities do not disappear when the armor becomes optional. They deepen because they're no longer mixed up with defense. They are simply who the person is. But alongside those qualities, the integrated Capricorn also gains access to what was always there and always waiting. Their emotional interior in all its particular depth and specificity. They can be moved by things without needing to immediately manage the fact of being moved. They can say, "I don't know yet," without experiencing it as a failure of competence. They can receive comfort without converting it into something they owe. They can be held. They do not become a different sign. They become a more complete version of the one they already are. And, perhaps most significantly, they become available for the kind of connection they have always wanted, quietly, persistently, beneath everything. The kind where someone truly sees them. Not their output, not their usefulness, not the resume of surviving. Them. The person who has been there, behind all of it, waiting in the dark to be found by someone with enough patience to actually look. If you're watching this as a Capricorn, the armor made sense. It was built in response to something real, and it served you in ways that genuinely deserve acknowledgement. You're not broken. You're not defective. You adapted to conditions that required adaptation. But you're also allowed to ask the quieter question, is this still necessary? Is this still serving me? Or is it now the main thing standing between me and the life I actually want to be living? You don't have to answer it today, but you can hold the question without being threatened by it. That, too, is a form of strength. If you're watching this because you love a Capricorn, they are not cold. They are not unreachable. They are a person who decided, at some point and for reasons that made complete sense at the time, that being fully seen carried too high a cost. Your work is not to tear down the wall. Your work is to become someone so consistently safe, so reliably present, so genuinely trustworthy over time, that they eventually choose, on their own terms, in their own time, to open the door. Those are different projects. The second one is slower, harder, and incomparably more worth doing. It's a long game. Most things worth having are. This is Capricorn Secrets, where we take the oldest symbolic language in the world and use it to understand the people around us and ourselves with more precision and less noise. No generalizations, no drama, just real analytical depth every week on the sign that the rest of the internet consistently gets wrong. If this is the kind of content you've been looking for, subscribe right now. Hit the bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You found the right channel.